All right. Meeting is now live streaming on YouTube. Just a sec. It's just setting up your meeting for YouTube Live. Hmm.
Okay. You're also recording.
Up. Yep. I guess I am recording. Yeah, I guess it's done.
Cool.
All right, just a sec. Okay, I see it. There is some lag, so I'm just going to mute that. Cool. Let's go for it. The audio is good, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right.
This
Well,
is
I guess we're
cool.
live then.
Yeah.
Hi, guys. Welcome back to the podcast. This is Abhinav and Ali over here from Half a Thought. And as you can see, I'm doing some cool stuff over here.
You
It's
spent
this
see
new
you
app that I've
get
been trying.
you used to give me a lot of slack for taking like half an hour to set up my microphone and all that. You spent 40 minutes today setting all this
No,
bullshit
I
up.
no, I barely spent like 20 minutes just setting this up because this is a new video conferencing app that I've started using. It's called because the founder said that it's useful. The founder says that it's nice to have an app, the name of which you can say while you're eating food. So that was really the inspiration. So what I'm doing over here is that I have an controller, and that is being plugged into Zoom. So I can do all this cool stuff. I can make myself opaque. I can increase my
This is gonna be
size. I
so
can
annoying.
decrease. This is fun.
I'm gonna have a terrible time. This is, and you decided to use this on our first live stream. How terrible of you.
But also, I think the quality is really, really bad. Yeah, the quality is not, but never mind. It's okay. It is what it is. My
No.
my audio is good, right?
Yeah, I can hear you really well.
Awesome, awesome. How have you been?
I've had a good day because I bought my first pair of Lululemon joggers.
Oh no.
Dude, they're amazing. I remember, okay, I have to go on a quick tangent really quickly because I have to tell a story about the time we went to Lululemon together once, and this was I think last year. We had gone together.
Leave that, because we were buying something else. Tell something else. Tell about
Fine.
my obsession with the fact that, and this is something that I get a lot of flack for. People just tell me that I'm just obsessed with the brand, but
Yeah.
and I get a lot of flack because people say that, oh, it's a brand mostly for girls, it's not for guys.
Okay,
So I'm
sure.
like, I don't know what to say to that.
I've seen, so I was actually so at Lululemon today, there was a line for people to wait and go, and they only allow 12 people in at a time. Dude, stop doing this. You're gonna annoy
All
the
right.
hell out of me today. So
Okay.
I was in line and there was like I was the one guy with like probably 20 girls in front and behind me while I was waiting in line. I felt so out of place. And when I walked in, like luckily the first person who came up to me and greeted me and asked me help was a guy. I was like, thank God, like I have a guy who's helping me out.
What inspired you to just go to Lululemon? And for those who may not know, Lululemon is like the traditional classical athleisure brand, which makes clothes with technical fabric and allows you to basically just lounge around and also um, just do exercise and look good. It's like
And
the
look at
the
yeah,
middle path between sweatpants and denims. I don't
yeah.
know how else to put it.
No, it's totally that. And the reason I bought him is that I wanted to get a pair of like athletic pants. And there's like soccer pants and like that people that you see like a lot of dancers like in AFX, which is a dance group at Berkeley. They wear these Adidas pants all the time. It's an iconic look. And or you have like Nike pants. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll look for that. I looked at him like this isn't my thing. Like this just doesn't work for me. So I was like, let's up the ante a little bit. Let's go to Lululemon, and it's like 5 times the price. But I think it's totally worth it. I mean, I wore them and I felt like, yes, this is it. Like this is perfect and what I need. So I'll be playing tennis in them. I'll just be lounging around everything. You can even like wear them out to like a dinner party if you wanted to.
I know exactly. I haven't done that yet, but I'm pretty sure that day isn't far when I may actually end up doing that.
Yeah. So
That's good. I
so
don't
I,
know. What's your take on these all-in-one things? these all-in-one
Which one? Or the what?
fabrics,
How do you mean all in
these
one?
all-in-one things, like how Lululemon claims to be an all-in-one thing, then tablets that are all-in-one, um, I don't know, devices that are all-in-one, Swiss knife, right?
Sure.
That's like all-in-one. Would you rather prefer things that do multiple jobs but are like actually one thing, or would you prefer like one thing for one specific job? The reason I asked this question, which has emerged organically, is because I believe I listened about it, uh listened to this sort of concept in one of the podcasts that I was listening to. I forget which one, but yeah, that was pretty much it.
I think I'm a bigger advocate of what you'd consider. I think this would make more sense to you of a closed system, right? Where
Okay.
everything is fully integrated. There's no additions you can add on to it. Everything is already pre-made, and you have nothing else to do with it. Um, and what it reminds me of is kind of the difference between Microsoft and the Microsoft operating
Apple.
system and OS X, right? I mean, OS X is like you can't add anything onto a computer, whereas in Microsoft you can download from anywhere and make all the changes you'd like. I much more prefer that closed system, having everything all in one. It leads
Hmm.
to much more organization, especially if you're not an expert in that field, right?
Yeah, yeah. I can see that. I think the way I'm starting to look at it is that you prefer all-in-one things, but in one sort of one bag, one meta thing. So fundamentally, you prefer like one ecosystem, but within that ecosystem, you can have like multiple things that are like sort of subparts of that ecosystem.
Totally.
So
Yeah, yeah.
for fashion, which is a good segue into the article that we're going to discuss today. For fashion, Lululemon serves as like an all-in-one encapsulating thing. And I know that this is probably an unpopular opinion. Within that, there are like multiple things you can do. You can wear the same thing for athletics, for sports. You can wear the same thing for leisure. You can wear the same thing for, you know, going to an event. Although that's controversial, but that's the way I sort of look at it. I don't know if you'd like to take this and segue into what we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, I
This was a
actually
pretty organic segue. This was by far the most natural segue that we've had till date.
considering that it was your segue, I'm actually not following at all about your natural segue. So go ahead and let's see where it goes. I'm not following.
No, so we wanted to, Ali and I actually exchanged this article, and we were thinking of doing the podcast on this format going forward. The idea was to basically think about blog posts, articles, or pieces of knowledge or wisdom that are out there on the internet, but for which there is no audio equivalent. And because of which the piece of literature or the piece of knowledge is just not buried, but it's not reaching to more and more people. And while we're just growing at this stage, we thought that one of the sets of essays that really inspired, impacted a few of my friends, and has of late done the same for me also, is essays by Paul Graham. And most of his essays, most of his advice is are like super clear. They're super to the point, and I think they are essentially very pivotal for anyone our age who is like in college or graduating or about to go to college, to just have at the back of their minds. Because for me, I wish I had discovered them sooner. Because first of all, Paul Graham's writing is absolutely clear. It's crystal clear, which is super rare because he is saying a lot of stuff and a lot of wise stuff, but he isn't using any of the highfalutin words. He's using just simple, common language, which is again very rare and something that is totally very cool to get the point across. And the second reason why I feel his essays and his advice is so genuine is because he doesn't have a vested interest. He's not selling you a course. He's done what he has to with his life. He's reached great heights. he inspires people, mentors them, mentors startups, and has succeeded in life. You could say that he has arrived. So therefore, he doesn't have a vested agenda as such, which is super great. That really just makes his essays super genuine, nice, and a pleasant reading experience. And the essay that Ali and I picked today was "What You Can't Say" by Paul Graham. And just as a digression, I've been torn between whether to pronounce Cant in the British way or the American way. Because a few of my friends say that I have a weird mix of an accent between, it's like the middle path between the British accent and the American accent. Um, because I stress my T's when others don't, in
But
say
as you
say
just did,
those,
don't.
yeah, as I just did. But at the same time, so that's, I don't know if that's British or American. That may be Indian. I don't know. But at the same time, I use some pronunciations that are American and some that are British. So can't is too much of a stretch. Can't is something that I that I can't do. So I don't know what to say.
This is this is kind of a great representation of what you try to determine what you want to say. It's like you want to say something one way, but you don't want to say it one way because it doesn't sound right. It becomes very complicated at that point.
So the idea was that, um, because we were talking about fashion, I guess I'll start with what Paul Graham has to say. And I guess, what would be nice is if I were to share my screen and just literally present my screen that way. I think that'll be super cool. So I'm just gonna do that.
Let's see if this works. As
Will
I drink
definitely
water,
work.
as I drink
Don't worry
water,
about it.
I will market it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Okay. So yeah, here we have the screen. You can see my screen, right? Yep. Awesome. Um, okay. Let me just share this particular window. Slides, screen share. What you can't say.
This is going to be
All
very
right.
confusing for our
Do
listeners
you
on
do
Spotify.
you I know. We would have to figure that out. Uh can you see my, yeah. Wait, this is strange. Okay, never mind. I'm just gonna do this and put myself. Actually, all right. Now I'm in the middle. Can you read the essay?
Uh, it's hard for me. It's a little small.
All right. Now,
That's better.
all right. Where am I placed? Okay,
In
I'm
the
right in the
middle,
center.
right
So
in,
I want to be over here. All right. Yeah, this is super cool. This is nice. So we were talking about fashion, and Paul Graham actually starts by talking about fashion, and he says that changes between the past and the present sometimes do represent progress. In a field like physics, if we disagree with past generations, it's because we're right and they're wrong. But this becomes rapidly less true as you move away from the certainty of the hard sciences. By the time you get to social questions, many changes are just fashion. The age of consent fluctuates like hemlines. And what he's essentially trying to say, and how the essay actually starts, is by talking about fashion. And he says that, well, there are fashions which are trends in terms of clothing, and then there are moral fashions. And he's saying that what scares me is that there are moral fashions too. They're just as arbitrary and just as invisible to most people, but they're much more dangerous. Fashion is mistaken for good design. Moral fashion is mistaken for good. Dressing oddly gets you laughed at. Violating moral fashions gets you fired, ostracized, imprisoned, or even killed. And this is where how our discussion on fashion and Lululemon, for that matter, brings us into this idea of moral fashion. What is right to say today? What is not right to say? and how can we determine what is right and what is not right. So this entire essay is essentially about this whole idea, and that's what both Ali and I found to be really exciting and really cool. That's why we just wanted to bring this up and talk about it and get each other's thoughts. So Ali, I'll just let you take it off from here and um, take it forward.
Yeah, my initial thoughts are this. I mean, over time, over the course of history, like fashion has changed, right? People will dress differently. People, have the tendency to, now more than ever, they wear shorter things. They're more revealing, whereas, prior they, covered everything. So, but the thing that I think that would set the context really well, and over like considering what we can't say, that doesn't mean that prior in history, those same rules applied, those same fashions applied. I think a really good way to start this off is whether the moral foundation on what we can and can't say have changed, or whether those moral principles have stayed the same throughout the course of history. And maybe, I think that's just at least my initial thought on seeing how we can kind of build off from that. So my what I want to say, and I think a lot of what happens in history and how people kind of consider their morals and how they react to different circumstances is purely based on coincidence. I mean, I'll give you an example, is that slavery and like black racism in the United States would not have occurred at all um, had Europeans brought slaves from Africa to the United States just because they were resistant to diseases. Had Europeans been resistant to diseases, then slaves would have been white. So I think it's a matter of coincidence that these principles kind of just fall into place and you kind of follow this moral code of ethics. Um, so I guess the first kind of dichotomy belongs in whether these principles are constant and static, or they are based on events that are just pure coincidence, or just by chance, and we just tend to follow that path.
That's it's interesting you say that some events might be just um, very very coincidental, because the way I read Paul Graham's essay, he clearly says that it's there are two ways that you can have opinions. Either you can question each and every single one of your opinions that you have so far till date, and when you do that, you'll realize that most of your opinions are actually unthought of. And if you follow that path of reasoning, what you'll eventually get to and understand is that, well, there are many opinions that you thought you had constructed from the ground up, but um, that was not the case. You were just fed those opinions, and you will realize that if you try to question each and every single one of your opinions so far. So that's one way you can get to sort of questioning this idea of moral fashion. The other way of getting to questioning this idea of moral fashion is well, if you try to, if you just accept that all of your opinions are just coincidental, which
Hmm.
means that if you say that, um, let's take any issue. If you say that guns should be legal, and that's a sweeping statement, but there are many nuances to this. But just for the sake of argument, let's say that if you say guns should be legal, and you say that that is something that people have agreed upon all this while, and that's something that I also agree with, you will realize that your opinions are nothing but a function of others, and what you are attributing as coincidence is again nothing but others having fed the same opinion to you over a period of time.
Yeah.
So, in both the cases, he says that it is extremely hard for you to have come up with an opinion just by yourself from first principles. And if you did, then that is what actually means, that is what actually shows whether or not you have your true opinions or not. And he says, this quote that I find to be extremely, extremely relevant. He says that, just, yeah. If you could travel back in a time machine, one thing would be true no matter where you went. You'd have to watch what you said. Opinions we consider harmless could have gotten you in big trouble. I've already said at least one thing that would have gotten me in big trouble in most of Europe in the 17th century, and did get Galileo in big trouble when he said it, that the earth moves. And then to go ahead with this, he talks about this conformity test. And I actually took out this excerpt. He says, let's start with the test. Do you have opinions that you would be reluctant to express in front of a group of peers? If the answer is no, you might want to stop and think about that. If everything you believe is something you're supposed to believe, could that possibly be a coincidence? Odds are it isn't. Odds are you just think what you're told. And that essentially summarizes what we just talked about and what I was trying to articulate, which is that most of our opinions are actually either just functions of um, others, or we just haven't thought them through that well.
Okay, so I can agree with this. I think initially it's the same from the day that we're born. Essentially, the first piece of information that we're given, usually the first piece of information that we're given, is usually the one that we always tend to believe is right. Right. For instance, I'll give you like the example that I can come to mind is that in the previous podcast, Jason and I were talking about religion, and he had sent me this reference about this Christian who converted from Islam to Christianity, Nabil Qureshi. We had this small discussion yesterday about who exactly Nabil Qureshi is. Abi thought he was this one guy who worked at Palantir. I said no, it's this guy who's a Christian apologetic, and essentially they're two different people with the same name. But Nabil Qureshi, he was born a Muslim, and we were and he was, introduced, he was imposed into that religion, and he kind of believed it for 20 years of his life until he started asking these questions. And it wasn't until he met this friend in college who enforced him to start asking questions about Christianity, to poke holes in it as much as he can, and do the same with his own religion. And part of that was part of the outcome was that he converted to Christianity just because he asked these questions of himself and tried to figure out. So I guess I think that suffices with how I want to understand essentially how coincidence doesn't necessarily validate our moral compass. The thing is though, okay, then the follow-up question is whether future events, or like then how does the moral compass evolve over time as fashion does?
I think that's where the entire notion of the argument lies. At one point of time, things that are considered blasphemous today were considered absolutely normal. Things like, I don't know, it was, I guess, in 1920 that women were given the right to vote. Before that, it was probably normal. I mean, yeah, it was normal for a long period of time for women to not vote. And today that idea just seems bizarre as to how that could have even been possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the notion of how do things evolve over a period of time, that is an interesting one. And I think Paul Graham ends the essay by saying, how can you see the wave when you're the water? Always be questioning. That's the only defense. What can't you say and why? So, what he's saying is that what was earlier, consider words like blasphemous and what's the other word? Yeah, I forgot. So, consider the word blasphemous. The modern day equivalent of the word blasphemous would be divisive, racially insensitive, or let's say defeatist, in the 20th century, which was so every argument that contradicted Churchill's argument was considered defeatist in the 20th century. So the idea is that things will evolve over a period of time, no matter how or what process they follow. But what does matter is two things. One, you could either belittle an argument just by calling it divisive or racially insensitive and just not engage with it. The other is that you can deeply question every notion and idea that evolves over a period of time and that is prevalent in a period of time. But at the same time, not just say it. Because the moment you say it, that's when you're opening yourself up to a lot of flack from others and a lot of, I would say, um, a lot of risky maneuvers by others. So Paul Graham says that he says, yeah, this is the most important. This is the most important part of the essay that absolutely struck me. I think it's better to follow the opposite policy. And the opposite policy is this. The opposite policy to what? That idea is the most important thing is to be able to think what you want, not say what you want. And if you feel you have to say everything you think, it may inhibit you from thinking improper thoughts. I think it's better to follow the opposite policy, which is to not feel that you have to say everything that you think. He says, draw a sharp line between your thoughts and your speech. Inside your head, anything is allowed. So draw a sharp line between your thoughts and your speech. And between your thoughts and speech, everything is allowed inside. Within my head, I make a point of encouraging the most outrageous thoughts I can imagine. But as in a secret society, nothing that happens within the building should be told to outsiders. The first rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club. So, to answer the question, how do these things evolve over a period of time? He says it's best to not just blatantly say what you think in that period of time in which an idea is prevalent. But what is important is for you to continue thinking about that idea over a period of time, because only when you think about it without having the obligation to say it out loud will you think about it properly. And when you think about it properly, that is when you form deep, original opinions, which are firm and solid in your own belief, and that can't be just shaken up by your friends, your family, or anyone you argue with. So I think that is something that really struck me. I think that is the essence of this entire essay.
I think throughout the course of history, the reason a lot of moral, like how moral fashions have changed, is partly as I think the mechanism behind it is that reason is that people have the tendency, people who are implementing these changes are thinking more than they're speaking. The thing is though, is that the things that they're thinking about are very nuanced and specific to the point where they're picking certain battles that they're fighting for. So let's, like, for instance, in the civil rights movement or in women's suffrage or in or let's say even now, even recently with the Black Lives Matters movement, I think to some extent people are picking certain battles that they're fighting for that they feel very passionate about, and they do so in a way where they're where they're they're I don't want to repeat it again in saying that people are thinking more than they're speaking, but I think the more important component is that I think when people think, they have the opportunity to be able to formulate the idea that is able to stick with more people, to stick better, right? Because essentially what changes, what creates new fashions and what makes new fashions stick are how well can you communicate the message to people through, you know, different mechanisms, such as the different people and the different people who are important for a message to stick, and how can you, you know, get people's stake involved in the game. And this brings us to like a previous podcast we had talked about, like kind of briefly mentioning Malcolm Gladwell and how, you know, this whole concept about the tipping point and how different people and different methods kind of allow us to move into a new direction into a new moral direction. So I think
But
that's, yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I finished my thought.
But do you feel that these passions of people, I think, but I mean, that's like further kicking the can down the road, right? Because we really don't know what, um, how are these passions of people governed? What drives them? What governs them? Because you know, even in the Nazi Germany, the people had a lot of passion for what they were doing.
Absolutely, yeah.
But that wasn't right, right?
It wasn't
So
right. It wasn't right to other people. It was right to them.
yeah, so but that's the tension, right? How do you question a prevalent idea um, that a lot of people support?
At some point, it's just a matter of consensus. I mean, if you, it's hard to talk about Nazi Germany specifically because you're talking about a very specific group of people. But essentially, when you look at the grand scheme of things, everything is governed by consensus, or like what a majority of the people believe. And usually the majority of what people believe is going to be something that is inherently fictitious, supernatural, something that does not represent the natural world, and something that, like, the only reason a lot of beliefs persist is because too many people believe them. So that's part of the reason why Nazi Germany died, is because more people believed otherwise.
Yeah, so I guess what Paul Graham is trying to say is that there will always be things that other people believe, but that doesn't mean that you should also fall into the trap of believing those things
Right.
simply because, and this is where, you know, we go into another part of, and one more part of the essay in which he says why you should try to um, question the existing ideas and why you should think differently. And a few quotes that really strike me are, he says, let me just make myself more opaque. That's
Oh
cool.
my God.
Yeah. He says, so these are just excerpts that I copied and pasted. I do it first of all for the same reason I did look under rocks as a kid, plain curiosity. And I'm especially curious about anything that's forbidden. Let me see and decide for myself. That's the first reason. You should
Mhm.
be curious because curiosity is seen to be a good trait. So you should just question existing ideas because you're curious. Second, I do it because I don't like the idea of being mistaken. This is something that I found really cool. You don't want to be wrong, right?
Mhm.
You're
Yeah.
paid to be right. You're paid for intuition. You're paid for predicting things ahead of time. And I remember one of the episodes by Naval Ravikant on Farnham Street. In that podcast, he said that most of success is governed not by getting things right, but it's by avoiding being horribly wrong. Because you can have intuition about a lot of things, but if you're horribly wrong, let's say on one particular aspect, let's say you're investing in the stock market, and you're just horribly wrong. You just go all in on one company and you're horribly wrong. That will probably cost you your entire career or your entire capital. So,
Sure.
so his idea is that if you just bat it out for long enough, you just stick in the game for long enough, and you avoid being horribly wrong, and you try to be right, that is much more useful than trying to be right all the time. So, he goes ahead and he talks about Darwin over here, but we'll get there. But really, what he says is that you should try to question the existing ideas first, to be curious, and second, because if you don't question the existing ideas, you may just be horribly wrong about them, and that may cost you, let's say, $1 billion startup idea. That may cost you a big lifestyle change. That may cost you a big mindset change, which could essentially change the entire trajectory of your life. So he says that if like other eras, we believe things that will later seem ridiculous, I want to know what they are so that I at least can avoid believing them. That's the third thing. That's the second thing. And the third thing why he does this is because I do it because it's good for the brain. To do good work, you need a brain that can go anywhere. And you especially need a brain that's in the habit of going where it's not supposed to. I think these three ideas, coupled with the fact that if you actually look at how big people, big inventors, big leaders, most successful entrepreneurs, executives, just people who essentially inspire us, the reason they are successful is because they questioned existing ideas which others thought were obvious. And that's where Paul Graham talks about Darwin. And he says that great work tends to grow out of ideas that others have overlooked. And no idea is so overlooked as one that's unthinkable. Natural selection, for example, it's so simple. Why didn't anyone think of it before? Well, that is all too obvious. Darwin himself was careful to tiptoe around the implications of his theory. He wanted to spend his time thinking about biology, not arguing with people who accused him of being an atheist. I think that really summarizes the entire notion of why you should try to question the existing ideas.
There's a bit of tug of war that I'm trying to understand here between questioning things and staying silent, because what we can't say is usually what we don't want to say is usually what we don't want to say sometimes are is ask these questions that don't conform to the norm, right? And that's essentially what we were going back to earlier about the conformist test, is that if you think that it doesn't sound right, or you think that people might not agree with it because of what others will think of you, then probably don't say it and think before you speak. But here we're also saying that it's also important to ask these questions so that way we can, progress, innovation, and ask these questions that that kind of move society forward. So this is the tug of war that I pose to you as a response to that.
Sorry, what's the question again?
Is that why? Like, how at the same time of asking these questions and coming up and asking these questions that people don't normally think of, how do you compensate for the fact with what Paul Graham said earlier about conforming? Is that, when you think that people don't necessarily agree with you, which is what Galileo, like, no one believed Galileo, no one believed Darwin at first, but they didn't conform. Yet sometimes we should conform, as he said earlier. So what is that relation? Like, I'm trying to figure out that.
No, I don't think he ever said that you should conform.
No, he said that when you go back up to the conformist test, he says, next you have to diligently practice closing your mouth as soon as you open it. If you have this problem reacting to people and situations around you by opening your mouth and talking, you are not reacting by thinking. Oh, I guess that it makes sense, because I mean, they're thinking about it prior to what they're saying, but I mean, but most of the time, I think the point that I'm trying to make is that a lot of times what we shouldn't say is usually going to be against what a majority of other people don't want to think or don't want to agree with you with.
You see, that's where I would apply the filter of feeling obliged that you should say what you think, and not feeling obliged to say what you think. If you scroll down to the end of the essay, right? Again, and this is something that we had just gone over. He says that how can you see the wave when you're the water? Um, Always be questioning. That's the only defense. What can't you say and why? So, and if you scroll up a bit, he also says that I think it's better to follow the opposite policy, draw a sharp line between your thoughts and your speech. I feel your question is founded on the premise that you should say what you think. And Paul is trying to question that and saying that the first rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club. So you can have ideas and you can choose to conform with others or choose not to conform with others, right? He talks about who was the astronomer before Galileo?
Copernicus.
Copernicus. He talks about Copernicus, and he said that, and yeah, I remember I studied this in my astronomy class with
Oh,
Alex Filipenko.
fun fact, I'm also taking Astro C10 for next
Oh
term.
wait, for next time, wait, but it's going to be online, so it won't be as much of a fun that
You know what the worst part is too? The lectures are the same lectures from the 2019 version of the class.
Wait, no, but are they going to be live or are they going to be pre-recorded?
No. I just all the lectures are this, like, he's just gonna give us the whole volume of lectures, and those lectures are the previous year's lectures.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, but part of the experience of taking that class in
I
person
know,
was because
I know.
you get to know Alex Filipenko, and he was
And
probably one of the best professors I've had at Berkeley.
and Abhi was the person who sat in the front row, asked like 10 questions per class.
Oh yeah,
He was the
I
annoying
was
kid in the front
I
row.
was I was the kind of student people would like just meet outside the class and say, "Oh, you're the one who asks all the questions." I'm like, "Yeah."
Yep.
And after a point of time, Alex Filipenko and I also grabbed lunch together, so that was also super cool.
Yeah.
And we had like a 3-hour lunch, deep life conversation, life advice sort of session in which he told me everything about his life, and that was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. But wait, where were we? We were talking about
About Copernicus and the difference between
yeah.
Galileo.
So he told me, I mean, it's a fact, but Copernicus did not publish his thoughts until after his death. So what he knew all this while that Earth wasn't the center of the world, he didn't say it, right? But that doesn't mean that I mean, you could say that externally he conformed and therefore he did not have an impact as large as he should have. Maybe, life would have been different naturally had Copernicus challenged the entire idea of astronomy before Galileo did. So in that context, he did conform. But I guess then it really boils down to the question of self-preservation versus what matters to you more, whether it's the cause or whether it's your yourself.
Hmm. Whether it's more about the cause or what do you mean by yourself?
I just got a comment saying, Abhi, you really need to stop asking questions.
Usually I'm the one who asks questions.
I don't know if this comment of Sachin's is in the context of astronomy or
Oh no, yeah, it was probably astronomy.
yeah. So
I
sorry.
guess the way that I would respond to that, or kind of follow up to that, is when we have these ideas that we want to that don't usually conform to norm. The tendency is that we have these we tend to have a closed have don't allow our thoughts to be exposed. But like, say we're thinking one way, but the way that we talk is another way. And this was another thing that Paul Graham had written, and it was a quote by an Italian ambassador, and I'm going to do my best to speak Italian here. It's I pensieri stretti and il viso sciolto. It's not bad.
That was
Which
pretty good, actually.
yeah. I don't know. Some languages come really easy. I mean, it's a romantic language, so it's not too bad. I pensieri stretti. Whatever, I'm not going to go anymore.
Wait,
But
do you know
anyways, the
how to
point
speak
is that
Italian?
no. So the only exposure I have to Italian is that a lot of music theory in piano is based on Italian words. So like forte, fortissimo, piano, all these other things. All music theory is based on Italian
Right.
words. So
I
that's
don't
the
know
only
any of
exposure I
that,
have.
but
So
sure.
like, yeah. Anyways, the point is
Yeah.
that it's better. It's to embrace closed thoughts, so to not let your thoughts spread, but to have an open face. So to pretend as if you know you're conforming to others, but you're thinking another way, which is kind of transitions me into wanting to talk about this concept that Paul Graham doesn't at all talk about, which are what many people call white lies. And white lies are essentially half truths, where you tell some of the truth but not all of the truth. And essentially that's what or you are thinking one way but you're saying something different, but what you're saying is like just bits and pieces of actually what you're thinking. It's like asking me, Ali, like what do you think about take a controversial topic, right? Say gun control,
Yeah.
as we did earlier. So like, Ali, what do you think about gun control? Oh, I think it's a very interesting like topic. I think there are like sides to weigh on both ends. I kind of agree with this. I kind of disagree with that. I'm not actually telling you how I feel. I'm just kind of being very diplomatic about it. So now my turn to ask a question is like, what are your initial thoughts about white lies? Because they kind of fall in line really nicely with having closed thoughts but an open face.
White lies as in half truths, right?
Yeah.
I think the way I try to look at white lies is, I remember reading this quote by Taleb, and he said, in a conflict, the middle ground is least likely to be correct. And how I took it was that in any conflict, the moment you say, so it's one thing to say that both sides are correct for conflict resolution, because if you want to resolve conflict, you want both sides to claim victory. And obviously, we're sort of extrapolating this entire idea to a more serious notion. But I guess that only further helps us elaborate the point. So it's one thing to say that that both sides are correct, and therefore the middle ground is what we should focus on. Because when you say that, on one hand, gun control is probably not its right because it violates the Second Amendment. On the other hand, if you say that, well, gun control is required, gun control is not required because we should have the power in ourselves to control and resist external force, to defend ourselves. The middle ground would be that, all right, you can have gun control, but you can ban, say, automatic rifles like AK-47 and so on and so forth. Now, for conflict resolution, and let's say if we have to reach a settlement or a solution, that works. In Taleb's context, he says that the middle ground is least likely to be correct when you're supposed to actually take sides because you so strongly believe in an idea. So in that context, when you take the middle ground and you say that, oh, on one hand there is this, on one hand there is that, that is, I would say, the task of the lazy mind, which doesn't serve any meaningful purpose. Because that way, I mean, you could take this in extreme and you could talk about anything, and you could always say that, oh, there are always two sides to the story. But really, that really doesn't serve any purpose. So in the context of white lies and half truths, you could talk about something that is fundamentally incorrect and put it in the context of a white lie or a half truth by saying that there are two sides to the same story, when in reality, there is only one side that exists. Right? Take, for example, I don't know, take for example the LGBTQ issue, right? Uh, it's not, it's, there could be, I don't know, but I feel that there has to be only one side to it. There cannot be two sides. Sorry, I lost you.
I would say that there are, I would say that I think on that issue, there's always going to be two sides. But the decision is going to take a middle ground. And I think that's where I'd stand.
That's right. That's right. I wonder how that links to your topic of half truths or white lies, and how that links in a meta way to what you cannot say.
So I'll try to explain my train of thought. Is that so? You take a political issue such as LGBTQ, and there's going to always be sides, right? And people inherently are always going to take sides, but they're going to present themselves as they're going to talk about the issue as if telling a half truth. They're not going to want to take sides because they don't want to. They don't want to necessarily conform. They don't want to hurt some people. They just kind of want to walk the middle ground, right? Um, but at the and this also goes back to the point of kind of the consensus, is that when you have a group of people who will agree with you, then you're in a consensus. You have a higher tendency to believe in this issue, and you've picked the battle, right? We were talking about picking our battles um, about issues that we're really passionate about, and the same will apply to the other side. People will, conform to one idea. They will pick their battle and say, okay, let's fight this. But at the end of the day, even though there are those two sides, the solution is essentially kind of falling in that realm of a white lie. Not a white lie, but like it is similar to the architecture of a white lie, because it is engaging both sides of the coin. I think that's how I would summarize it. If you have anything to add or want to follow on that.
I think that absolutely makes sense. And it's only in the context of this that one idea from the essay really strikes me, and that's the idea of open-mindedness. Um, I don't know if you'd like to take a stab at it, or I could go, whatever you prefer.
Um, I think I'll follow up on what you say, because I also have another point, but you go ahead.
Paul Graham says when people are bad at math, they know it because because they get the wrong answers on tests. But when people are bad at open-mindedness, they don't know it. In fact, they tend to think the opposite. Remember, it's the nature of fashion to be invisible. It wouldn't work otherwise. Fashion doesn't seem like fashion to someone in the grip of it. It just seems like the right thing to do. It's only by looking from a distance that we see oscillations in people's idea of the right thing to do and can identify them as fashions. I think this hits the nail on the head about the idea of white lies, half truths, solutions to conflictual issues, the middle ground, and I think it abstracts things away to one level deeper and just makes you focus on how you even arrive at that solution more than the fact that you arrive at the solution.
What I would add to that is, as being an observer in all of this, and observing all these fashions, um, it is, and how we had also talked about thinking more than speaking, but we also neglected the fact that as an observer, we're not only thinking, but we're also listening. And I think listening is like such a critical component of speaking, because I think, to me, I would rather listen than speak more, and think. I mean, think and speak, or sorry, not think and speak. Think and listen are kind of corollaries to each other. But the way that I would say it is that you should listen at least as much as you speak.
That's right. That's right. And I think that's something that is lagging when you think about conflict resolution or coming to a solution, because you always want to say what you so strongly believe that you don't listen to the other's views.
Yeah.
And we tend to resort to that every once in a while because our beliefs, first of all, going from the top of the essay, right? First of all, we have to examine whether our beliefs are our own or whether it's a massive coincidence that what the current uh, times believe is right, we also happen to believe that.
Yeah.
So that's most likely not a coincidence. It only means that we have been fed what we think. Um, Going off from that, I think it links beautifully in this context because it forces you to believe, forces you to be open-minded. Because if you just keep on saying stuff that you think is right, but you don't actually listen, you actually may not be open-minded. Because let's say, and again, the example may be flawed, but let's say we're talking about gun control, right? If you're only talking about one thing again and again and again, you're just speaking. You're not listening.
Right.
And as simple and simplistic as it sounds, I think it's like a one step beyond this article, because this tells you to be open-minded by telling you when you are in fact open-minded and when you're not. But the tangible next step that we can apply is to take a distance from it, and we can take a distance from it by actually listening.
Yeah. Um, so I have a funny story to tell. To this morning, I had a reunion with most of my friends who were at Cambridge and students who were there I was studying with. And we had this whole big reunion. They had a presentation and a program. And towards the end, at the end of the Zoom call, people kind of hung around and started talking to each other and chatting and catching up. And then towards the end, there were about 5 people who were really close friends. Like we were all very close, and we started talking. And this one person shows up out of the blue, late to the Zoom call, and stays there. I mean, we knew her. I know her. She actually goes to Berkeley, but she had her camera off. She was muted for the whole time, and she said probably a total of 5 words. But for the entire conversation of our personal conversation, she stayed silent, but she was listening the whole time. It was really awkward because she was outside of our friend group. And I was like, like she's listening to all of this. Like, I wonder what she's doing. And she's like, she comments a little bit and I don't know what she's thinking, which is probably to her advantage. Um, but I think there's a lot of power there's a lot of power in listening.
I can imagine that. I think I was also reading one of Paul Graham's essays, one of his other essays. I don't know. I've just been on a trip just reading his essays because I just find them to be super duper useful in every respect. He says that life is short, and he talks about this idea that, let's say you have kids. Um, the number of times that you will actually see your kid believe in the make believe Santa Claus story is from the ages 3 to 10,
Hmm.
which means that a total of about 8 times you'll see your kid um, being really awed by Santa Claus.
Yeah.
And then he says that, in his simple writing, which is just fantastic, he says that it's one thing to say that, eight peanuts is nothing or 8 cars is a lot. But it's another to say that when you don't have any quantity or any tangible good attached to the number eight of anything is not a lot.
Yeah.
So his idea is that life is short. And the reason I brought up the story was because he specifically mentions why online debates are one of the biggest wastes of time. He says in this essay, he says, argue with idiots and you become an idiot.
Yeah.
And to that, he says, when you find something you can't say, what do you do with it? My advice is don't say it, or at least pick your battles. And I
Right.
think
Yeah.
this entire idea of online argumentation, right? The fact that, you know, Naval blocks every single, one of the people who tweets bad stuff at him. Or even Talib says that you should block your followers because that increases and improves the quality of your debate and discussion on Twitter. So you should basically block the haters, not all your followers. And that's what even David Perel says, that your Twitter account is as valuable as the comments um, on your tweets. So I think this links really well because online argumentation and debate is one way in which I would say that at least I get the feeling that most people aren't listening. They're just trying to make their own points, which is not that useful or productive.
We've I would certainly agree with that. But a lot of like the beauty of the internet is that you can say whatever you want, right? Um,
That's true.
so and say a lot of what we've discussed so far has been about well, a lot of what we've discussed so far has been about controversial things, like talking about controversial topics. How can we like should we still apply the same principles and the same kind of methods that we've done here outside that context? Can we still use these um, on non-controversial things? I mean, of course, like we can. I guess like the first thing that comes to mind is about politeness and courtesy and how we should be very formal and talk a certain way and not say these things and not say that those like other things such as like swearing, right? Um, so like I'm just curious on at least that's like at least the half thought I have so far of whether these things still apply outside the context of controversy, because we have the tendency to not want to talk about things, especially when they're
Yeah,
controversial.
that's right. I think that's a very interesting thought because I guess the reason I shy away or I don't engage in, or at least I try not to engage in online debates is because, yeah, I just find them to be, I mean, on controversial issues, I find them to be pointless because it really isn't serving any purpose.
True.
What would be more effective is a one-on-one conversation with someone who's truly eager to listen, understand, and debate. Um,
Notice that the first word you said was listen as opposed to anything else.
Yeah, and I think that naturally came to me: listen, understand, and then debate. Not just comment because you want to prove a point. And I think social proof and social validation also plays a big role in all of this, right? The One of the other subtle reasons people tend to debate online and tend to signal virtues online is because, well, you get social proof and validation from the people who you want to seek social proof and validation from.
Yeah.
So that really doesn't serve any purpose, or it isn't meaningful in the long term. So I guess to your question about whether these principles apply outside of controversial issues, I feel that if you are doing stuff and producing content or engaging in meaningful discussion, which the purpose of which is to help someone be better, get better in their lives, improve their thinking, make it more nuanced, make it better, make it more, uh, enrich it. If that is the purpose that is understood, that is um, decided beforehand, I think then it's extremely meaningful to engage in those kinds of online discussions, debates, conversations. I am subscribed to Zat Rana's Substack. Zat Rana is a thinker, writer, I would say a modern day philosopher who has these great deep insights and thoughts about life, philosophy, and a bunch of other things. And he on Substack, because it's a paid subscription, he has this coffee house in which his readers basically just go and post long comments. So it's like, think of it like a meaningful Reddit thread where people are not putting others down. They're actually there to learn and um, discuss ideas and actually improve their lives and help others also live more meaningful lives. And the reason it's so valuable is because, first of all, it's like a paid subscription service, right? So only those people who are truly interested will actually be part of that service. And the second reason is that even though they may be discussing a controversial or a non-controversial issue, they will still be very respectful of each other because, there won't be any trolls, right? There won't be any
Right.
haters, and there won't be, people who just say bad stuff because they just don't like one word or they just have some personal grudge against you. So I guess online conversation debate around controversial or non-controversial issues is meaningful when you either have a paid service, a paywall, behind which you can have these discussions with a certain group of people, or you are discussing non-controversial issues, the intent of which is to help each other live better, more meaningful lives. And I think the idea of open-mindedness would follow implicitly in these kinds of discussions.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's a good the subscription that you have is a good counterexample to what you see a lot on the internet, especially when they're based on like a lot of taboos, or like, they're very biased opinions that are funded not in, intellectual queries, but rather, you know, um, what a lot of people consider to be as like predisposed opinions on what we were talking about earlier about, that those kind of initial impressions that we get on an issue because we are exposed to them first. So yeah, I think that's it's a great example.
I think we've covered a lot of stuff from where does this idea of what can't you say comes from. Then we talked about why you should try to at least think about, if not say, what you actually cannot say in a certain amount in a certain period of time, which is the idea of plain curiosity. You know, don't be mistaken. It's good for the brain, and we talked about Darwin and stuff. We also talked about this idea of open-mindedness and why the middle ground is least likely to be correct um, when you're actually taking sides. But the middle ground is correct when you're coming to a solution. But to come to that solution, you have to have a certain mindset, which is predefined, which is preset. And that mindset can be achieved by you um, having this clarity in your head of questioning ideas from ground up, having this clarity in your head between separating your thoughts and your speech, and listening, which is the most important activity. And when you listen, then, we talked about you will naturally not engage in meaningless online debates about controversial issues because there's literally no purpose that those debates are serving apart from signaling social proof and just you getting a kick out of just, I don't know, embarrassing someone and hating on someone. And I think that really serves as a good framework. I mean, helps me deepen my thinking about this entire essay. I don't know what your thoughts are.
And all of the principles that you had just mentioned, they they're vehicles to allow us to pick our own battles, which makes our the action of speaking or lack thereof much more impactful. Because at times when we use all these things such as thinking, speaking, listening, and discuss, and as we've discussed in the rigor that we have, um, it's helped me to kind of put more clarity to what things I really should um, take sides on, and what things I should perhaps fall on that middle ground for.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a whole spectrum of how much we should talk or not talk. And I think the things that we've discussed today kind of provide us some navigation on where we should, what like the tools we should use to be able to find on what situation to fall in line with that spectrum.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest learning for me from this entire essay. I would really recommend and suggest anyone who is just in our age group again, if you haven't discovered this treasure trove of Paul Graham's essays, just do go and have a read because it will fundamentally question your existing beliefs and make you rethink your ideas, notions, concepts, and really challenge your thinking in a way that's it's like the modern day Socrates, I would say.
Yeah. So Abhi, I think because it's very appropriate that we talk about what we can't say. We've talked a lot, so maybe we should stop talking.
I think I think this is a good segue. I think I was going for a better exit, but
Yeah.
with I was trying to. I think the conversation had its ups and downs, and it had its climax when I summarized.
Yeah.
And then, I was trying to end it on a good note by talking about why you should read Paul Graham's essays. And there comes you, who just ruins my entire ending and just says, we need to stop talking. I think we need to work on our segues more and our exits more.
See,
That would
the
be
hard part
incredibly
is
valuable.
the exits are hard. I'll admit, like it's hard to transition to an ending. It's easy to transition in the middle from topic to topic, but the ending is hard. Like, how do you tell someone that just to stop talking?
No, I guess right now how I was doing, right? That you should read Paul Graham's essays, and you could have said, all right, yeah, I think that's a good enough. That's yeah, it's hard. It's kind of hard because no matter what you say, I think it continues the conversation.
Yeah, see, it's
I
better. It's
think
better.
that could
See,
be continue.
no. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
I think that would be one of the next podcast ideas, right?
How to
Because
end a podcast.
no. That yeah, that could be the title. But what I'm thinking about is, how do you end a conversation, or what's the right moment to
Ah,
end a conversation?
yeah, that's a good one. All right, stay tuned for next time.
Stay tuned. Thank you, guys.